Back in front of a judge today. This time, she's facing the contempt charge that she picked up during her criminal trial connected to the disappearance and death of Jennifer Farber-Dulos.
And Channel 3 New Haven Bureau Chief Matt McFarland was inside the courtroom and joins us now live with the very latest. What can you tell us, Matt?
Well, Nicole and Kara, this was a very quick court appearance today, just a few minutes. It was actually continued to September, but both sides hope to reach an agreement before then. Now, today in court, the attorney for Michelle Troconis entering a not guilty plea and electing for a jury trial. She's accused of showing a court-ordered sealed Dulos family psych report on her laptop during her criminal trial, in which she was found guilty in connection to the death and disappearance of Jennifer Farber-Dulos. Now, during that trial, a friend of Jennifer Farber-Dulos saw part of that sealed document on Michelle Troconis' laptop screen and reported to the prosecution's investigator. That info turned over to the judge and the attorneys with a contempt charge and a hearing later set. Now, the judge sealed that psych report back in 2019, just weeks before Jennifer Farber-Dulos disappeared. Back in February, a jury convicted Michelle Troconis of conspiracy to commit murder, tampering with evidence, and hindering prosecution, with a judge in late May sentencing her to 14.5 years in prison. Her family continues to claim she's innocent, that she was not involved in Jennifer's disappearance and death, and they plan on appealing her conviction. Again, that contempt hearing continued to mid-September, but both sides say that they plan on meeting at a pre-trial hearing before that, hoping to reach a resolution before then. We're live at the mobile newsroom outside Stamford Superior Court. Matt McFarland, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.